Hello and welcome to episode 80 of the CRICKETher weekly Vodcast. We're here at the Kent County Cricket Ground in Canterbury in front of a beautiful sign showing the Kent double winners this year, having won the London Championship and the T20 Cup for this part of the country. And we're looking forward to the final ODI between England and New Zealand today. But before that, we've got lots to talk about here. Starting with, last week we talked about the England tour to Pakistan and whether or not that would go ahead. We now have an announcement on that. Raf, what's the story?
The ECB met as a board on Sunday and then I think made the announcement on Monday evening that neither the men's nor the women's teams will be touring Pakistan. They initially tried to say that it had been a kind of player-led decision, and that's quite interesting because it was then slightly contradicted by something that Heather Knight said in the press conference after the England v New Zealand match the following day. And actually I feel like to some extent the ECB have dropped Heather in it a little bit this week. There hasn't been any senior ECB officials out there doing press conferences. They've just kind of dropped this announcement that the tours are cancelled into the kind of public view and just sort of let it rest. But obviously the England women still have this series going on, so that's meant that Heather Knight's had to kind of front up on a couple of occasions about her comment on the tour, and she has basically said actually that what was implied in the press release, that it was a player-led decision, is wrong. That she wasn't personally consulted, that her team were not consulted. Now she wasn't criticising that. She was just stating what she felt was the truth. She was just basically saying, the people above us made that decision. They're the ones with the security information. They're the ones with the requisite knowledge to make that call, basically. But yeah, it did certainly suggest that what had initially been said wasn't totally correct. And the ECB have now slightly backtracked and said, yes, well, of course, we didn't really mean that. Of course, what we actually meant was that we made the decision on behalf of the players for their welfare and for their own good. And there was an interesting report on CRICKETher that suggested that the board had anticipated that some players would pull out and were especially concerned about their ability to select a women's squad of sufficient quality. I'm not quite sure where that's come from, because my understanding of the situation is that yes, the England women's players are a bit exhausted, but they don't have the kind of power or the authority to reject their cricket board or their employers say so. If the ECB said to them, you're going to Pakistan, then they'd be going. Unlike the men, they can't pick and choose which tours that they go on. They don't have that power. So I don't quite know where that's come from, but yeah, interesting speculation there. One thing that might be interesting to think about, though, is to what extent this might affect the future tours programme for the women's SID, which is obviously dictated now around the ICC Women's Championship, which is the qualifying path for the World Cup. So what do you think about that?
Well, there's certainly some interesting questions going to be asked there. England in this schedule are not due to visit Pakistan, and of course didn't visit Pakistan technically last time because they played their match in Kuala Lumpur, or their matches in Kuala Lumpur. But the Pakistan board have said following this incident that they will not be playing. Well, what they actually said was they will not be playing matches in Dubai anymore. So that, I suppose, gives them a small get out. They could still play them somewhere like Kuala Lumpur. But what the Pakistan board are certainly implying there, I think, is that they are expecting the international teams now to come to Pakistan. And interestingly enough, we had one of the senior British ambassadors, from Pakistan, saying that he felt personally that there was no reason why this tour shouldn't have gone ahead. So that will give more ammunition to the Pakistan Cricket Board. So the really interesting question is now, what happens? Do those teams feel compelled to visit Pakistan? Do they forfeit those matches? Do they lose the points from those matches? Are the points going to be shared? Because different things have happened, haven't they, Raf, in the past?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously the ongoing controversy has been between the India and Pakistan teams, because there's obviously this kind of government reluctance to allow Indian teams to play Pakistan teams for political reasons. Now, in the first iteration of the Women's Championship in 2016, when it all wrapped up, the points were awarded to Pakistan, and there was a hoo-ha about that. Then in the most recent iteration, the ICC announced that they were going to split the points between the two countries, and they kind of covered it up by saying, oh, lots of tours have been cancelled because of COVID, while ignoring the elephant in the room that this had nothing to do with that particular one. And I tweeted at the time saying I thought that was outrageous and makes a mockery of the whole process. But you do now think that the ECB pulling out of this tour to Pakistan is going to give the BCCI kind of added impetus for them not sending their women's team to Pakistan or hosting Pakistan there, and kind of give them extra power in that. So I think it's quite worrying overall for Pakistani women's cricket, really. Now, the cancellation of the tour to Pakistan does mean that, in theory, the England contracted players would be available now to go and play in WBBL. Our understanding is that mostly that is unlikely to happen because they're all a bit knackered at the back end of the season. On the other hand, that does open the way to some of the non-England contracted players to go to Pakistan. And we've had a couple of to go to WBBL, and we've had a couple of exciting announcements this week, haven't we, Sid? So Maya Boucher and Eve Jones are both going to be appearing for the first time ever in WBBL.
Yeah, great news for both those players, isn't it? And two quite interesting selections. They're players the two players that are at either end of their career, really. Maya's just starting off on her career. I mean, she's not 14, but she's just really starting off her professional career. She was one of the new professionals. She's just made her England debut, and she'll be looking to kind of build a bit of a reputation, and she'll be coming in, I hope, with kind of not too much pressure going into the WBBL, and she's got a real opportunity to kind of present herself as the new Maya Boucher, the sort of T20 cricketer, the powerful hitter, and that's a great opportunity for her, I think. Eve Jones at the opposite end of her career. She's obviously, realistically coming towards the end of her career. She's nearly 30, if not 30. But she'll be looking at other options, of course, post-career. So there's opportunities for her to act as a sort of mentor and as a senior player, and to show perhaps her credentials for moving forward, maybe into some sort of coaching and management role after her career. So two different players, two different opportunities, but it'll be brilliant to see them both turning out in WBBL. And I can't wait to be turning on my stream at 4 a.m. to watch them. WBBL. Now, talking of Australia, there's been a fantastic series going on between Australia and India. We were listening to the third ODI in the radio when we were coming down to Canterbury this morning, and it was just another very exciting finish. And we had two exciting finishes really now, haven't we? The first game went to Australia reasonably easily, and we thought, oh, okay, we know what's going to happen here. Australia are going to win all these matches. But the second game didn't quite turn out like that either, did it? Because there was some excitement about a no ball, or was it, Raf?
Yeah, so it was Julian Goswami, wasn't it, bowling to Nicola Carey. It was meant to be the last ball of the match. It came at her, and it was approximately waist height, round about there. It was certainly a narrow call. She hit it, she was caught, and we thought that India had won, and then they went to the third umpire and they ruled that it was a no ball. Definitely a close call, and then of course Goswami had to bowl another ball, and Australia hit the winning runs in the end. So yeah, it was a bit of an anticlimax, bit of a disappointment if you were kind of on any team in the world that's not Australia, I suppose, because people are really gunning for their winning streak to end. Sorry guys, but it's true. We're bored of Australia winning ODIs. Anyway, from my perspective, I did tweet this afterwards. I don't think it was a no ball. I think that it was a very marginal decision, and that Nicola Carey was first of all out of her crease and was secondly crouched down, and that gave the illusion that it had come at her above waist height, but I personally don't think it was. However, I did also say that it's not my decision to make, and we just have to kind of trust the integrity of the umpires who made that decision. So I don't think there's any point in harking on about it now, and there's especially no point in harking on about it now because Australia's winning streak has officially now been broken by India. And I can't say that I'm too disappointed. Are you disappointed, Sid?
Well, I mean, I think that Australia's, what we need is teams to be challenging Australia, really. And so I think that overall it's good news that India women are doing that. I think it's fascinating from a sort of cricketing perspective that India women perhaps have come into this series against Australia after their performance against England. We probably thought that it would be quite an easy series for Australia, and in fact they've been very, very more competitive against Australia than they did against England, which is interesting. But that's the way a matchup works in cricket. Sometimes you'll look good against one side and not so good against another side because you've got different matchups and different qualities there. So, and talking of matchups of a sort in the international arena, we've of course got the final. Gosh, I'm so tired. I can never remember whether it's the fourth or the final or the fifth. The final ODI between England and New Zealand taking place later today. And we had a very exciting game in the fourth ODI, didn't we? Where England, kind of picked themselves up after defeat in the third match and sealed the series thanks to Heather Knight, Raf.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really exciting series. I've got to say it's not done my stress levels and my tiredness levels much good because all of these matches have been going down to the wire. As you say, the fourth one did as well. I think one of the interesting things is that Heather Knight, despite having played a very kind of calm innings, a very kind of Heather Knight-esque innings, if I may say so, actually then got out in the 49th over, and we did think, oh gosh, is this going to be upending what looks to be the likely result? But of course, England did get over the line thanks to Anya Shrubsole and a Lee Kasprick wide in the end. So well done England. But obviously Heather Knight was absolutely gutted to have got out when she did, and she said she came off and she was kind of pouring expletives everywhere. Just think that it speaks to kind of an ongoing theme of this series really, which is that a lot of the England top and middle order just look absolutely shot. They're so tired. I mean, we're tired, they're tired. It's been a very long season. There was a really interesting comment on one of your pieces, Sid, on CRICKETher by James P., who basically kind of recognised that tiredness and says that he thinks that perhaps next season the ECB need to have a think about seriously having some breaks for the England players, and I think that that's a good point. I think sometimes in the men's game people forget this because all of the England women played in every single match of the 100. It was a very, very intense few weeks, incredible levels of scrutiny. And just, match following match following match. They didn't have any break in the way that the England men's players did. They only really played a handful of matches in that, if any. So I wonder whether going forward, the ECB will really need to think about that, especially given that we've got the Commonwealth Games next year. Can they actually fit everything in? They need to be thinking about these players. And obviously you made the point that if you haven't grown up professional, then that's actually a tougher ask to suddenly be asked to do all this cricket. But overall, it's been a fun kind of exciting series. And talking of dramatic finishes in matches, Sid, we have come from where were we yesterday? We were Northampton, thanks. I've forgotten where we are going to be. Anyway, we were in Northampton yesterday for the most exciting of finishes there. Now, as a Vipers fan, Sid, you probably would have preferred it to be a little bit less close than that, wouldn't you? You actually found yesterday's final so stressful that I looked up from writing my match report and found that you'd left the press box and gone to sit in the crowd for the final few overs. How was that for you, Sid?
Oh, it was great. I went to sit down with the Southern Vipers Massive. There's a small but significant group of fans that have followed them around everywhere since the KSL days, and I went to sit down with them and enjoy. Well, I'm not sure that we necessarily enjoyed the first little bit of the end because it was very, very nail-biting, but by the last over it was pretty clear that the Vipers were going to take the win, and so we enjoyed that and we all got up and cheered at the end, and as a Vipers fan that was wonderful. As a Yorkshire person, you're obviously going to be very disappointed, and I noted on Twitter that Yorkshire have now lost the List A competition, whatever that is, and come runners-up for the last 5 consecutive years. So the final 3 county championships and the first 2 RHFs, Diamond stroke Yorkshire have come second every single time, and it's becoming a bit of a habit. But the Vipers were absolutely determined that they were going to win, and we spoke to Tara Norris afterwards, and she was just like, I've had 3 final stays this year, I've lost 2 of them, it hurt like hell, I was damned if I was going to lose this one. She said it in a slightly different way to that, but that was pretty much what she was saying. She kind of stuck like a rock out there, and she was brilliant. And Emily Windsor, who looked absolutely exhausted. I mean, even before the final balls were bowled, it looked like Tara Norris was kind of having to haul Emily Windsor up off the carpet between overs because she was knackered. She put everything into it. She faced nearly 100 balls. She only mmade she made like 47 runs, I think, but it was still an absolutely mammoth innings. And Charlotte Edwards, we spoke to her afterwards as well, and she said, Emily Windsor Windsor is probably going to come off worrying about her strike rate, but her strike rate doesn't matter. The important thing was she stayed there, and they got over the line and won that game. So great for the Vipers, and I'm really sorry for Yorkshire. It's really starting to feel like always the bridesmaid. But I feel confident that one day Yorkshire will be the bride. So you'll get there, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the sad thing sometimes about these tight finishes, is that one side always has to lose, unless it's Australia, and then we don't really mind. And finally this week, we've had quite a big, in some ways, big announcement from the MCC this week. It certainly generated its share of controversy, and that is that they are updating the laws to reflect the new kind of gender-neutral realities of cricket, and they are going to change all references to batsman to being to batter. Now, there's been quite a lot of talk about this, quite a lot of chat, quite a lot of disquiet. It's caused a bit of a stir amongst old white men who think they rule the world. Now, over to an old white man for his view. Sid.
I thought you had another old white man there for a minute. Okay, so my perspective, well, it's actually quite an odd one, because in some ways I'm on the side of the old white men in that I did not have really a problem with batsmen. So you wrote a piece for the site 3 or 4 years ago now saying you didn't have a problem with batsmen either. Batsmen had always been used by the Women's Cricket Association, so it was part of their original vision was that they should be the equal of men, and therefore they were batsmen as well. And I kind of took on board that perspective when I first started paying attention to the women's game in the 1970s. Yes, I'm afraid I was alive in the 1970s. Then batsman was the thing that was no one would have dreamed of saying batter then, and that's kind of mostly carried on, but it has to be said that we were getting to be kind of ploughing a lonely furrow there as supporters of the women's game that were still using batsmen, and we don't, in fact, in practice we'd increasingly dropped it in our copy as well. You dropped it in the Guardian because every time you used batsman the copy editor changed it to batter. I pretty much changed it on CRICKETher as well. So I think that we accepted that was a thing that we'd lost, and that we were happy to go with batter going forwards, weren't we, Raf?
Yeah, I think so. I thought that, from my perspective, it's always been a case of kind of listening to the players and it being a player-led thing. I thought it was really interesting that after one of the England-New Zealand matches, when Catherine Brunt was in the press conference, she actually referred to herself as a batsman, and I thought, I wonder if that's going to get copy edited out, despite the fact that it's in direct quote marks. Didn't actually see whether anyone had picked up the quote in their copy in the end, but that's how she refers to herself. That's how players of her generation did refer to themselves, and so from my perspective it was always a bit like, well, who am I, or who are we as kind of people looking on from the edge of the pitch to try and say to you, sorry, you can't call yourself that anymore, you have to refer to yourself as this. Well, it's not my job, and it just felt all a little bit like kind of holier than thou. However, I accept that there's been a little bit of a generational shift now, and that there are plenty of club players and probably some of the younger England players who now feel a little bit uncomfortable about using the term batsman and don't really feel that describes them appropriately. So if they want us to call them batters, then that's fine. Again, it's about it being player-led and driven by the people who are actually at the heart of the game, really. I think that my other slight issue with all of the conversation around this week has been that it does feel a little bit like it's the MCC just kind of belatedly recognising a little bit of a status quo. As you've kind of described it, lots of people are already using batter, and the MCC now seem to kind of slightly be using this as an opportunity to wave their hands in the air and go, oh, look at us, we're so great, we're recognising this, and aren't we wonderful, and all of these equality and diversity and inclusion points for us, when actually if you look at things that the MCC could be doing that would actually make a real difference to the lives of female cricketers, this isn't really one of them. There's plenty of other things that I'd much rather see them doing. Maybe let us use your ground. There was a brilliant tweet as well that I think summed it up, which basically just said, won't the women cricketers in Afghanistan be so pleased now that they can refer to themselves as batters instead of batsmen? It's a bit facetious, but basically it's getting at the heart of the issue, which is that it's about material realities of these women's lives, rather than just a kind of a slightly kind of after the fact recognition of the fact that we can now call them batters instead of batsmen. So if anyone from the MCC is watching this, then perhaps you could do something a bit more meaningful. I feel like we've ended it on a little bit of a negative note there. Let's be really happy about the fact that the season's ending and we can go home tonight and get a decent night's sleep, Sid, and not have to be travelling several hundred miles tonight and then getting up early tomorrow to do exactly the same thing all over again. That's all for this week. Bye for now.